Welcome. I'm Nora Shabazi, the founder of EBLI, Evidence-Based Literacy Instruction, which is a system that effectively and efficiently teaches anyone of any age or ability level to reach their highest potential in reading, writing, and spelling. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my daughter's story, her experience that actually led me to leave my profession as a neonatal intensive care nurse and really devote my life to literacy and literacy instruction. So back in the mid-90s, we lived in Guam with the military, and Colleen had a very advantaged upbringing in life. She got to travel a lot of places in the world thanks to our life in the military, and she got to do very interesting things like play with kangaroos in Australia and snorkel in the Philippine Sea off Guam, and just a lot of really great life experiences that many people never get to, experience. So she had a very advantaged life. And we moved back to Michigan in 1996, and she is the middle of my three daughters. Hannah's the oldest, and then Colleen and Kelly. And Colleen was taught in Guam, she was taught a very explicit phonics program called ABECA in her little school there when she was in kindergarten. And she did really well with that. When there was one letter, one sound, reading words like run and gum and, dad and those types of things. But when they got to instruction that was more than one letter spelling, so the two letters make a sound, or rules, or that type of thing, it really did not make sense to her. She was a very creative, good math, bright young lady, but she, it didn't make a lot of sense to her once that code got more complex and weird. And then at that time, we moved back to the States, and she was in a Catholic school for a short time where they taught whole language. And she had a very good memory, so she looked like a very good reader in first grade. And she could memorize the books and the stories. And after a few months, she actually went from the Catholic school to the public school, and they did more of a balanced literacy where they would, I was actually volunteering in the classroom one day with my youngest daughter, Kelly, and the teacher put up on the board EA, and she said, when two bells go walking, the first one does the talking, so this is E, and they were going to read a story called The Dream Team, and I remember that very vividly. And they also did a lot of, reading by, giving them books to, experience and that type of thing. And also they had a Basil series where they would listen to the story on a tape, the teacher would read the story, and then they would read the story all week long. And Colleen had a tremendous memory, so she could memorize that story. Her favorite trick was to read the story with looking at the ceiling. She could basically recite it like a speech, which is pretty interesting. But what she couldn't do is she couldn't read a new story that she wasn't familiar with, and she also couldn't read the same sentences pulled out of the story if they were not, in the order that she had memorized them. So any new book, she was very resistant, wouldn't even try to read, but she looked like, and I was told that she was the best reader in first grade, in her first grade classroom, doing what I call pretend reading, memorizing the book and reciting it as if she could read it. She also did that interestingly with piano. She sounded like a maestro playing, I always call it the Ice Cream Man song, do-do-do-do-do-do-do, that one. She could play that beautifully. She could not play any other song on the piano at all. So I realized that in second grade, I realized that she was in trouble when I saw outside on a parent night, outside the room on the wall was it was a writing piece that she had written, and it had dogs at the bottom. I actually have it right here in my drawer. I'm going to pull it out. I keep it right next to me here in my office. And it was, here it is, if you can see a little bit of some of that spelling, and you can see the dogs. So I could look at the picture, and I knew it was about dogs, but the spelling is horrifically done, very misspelled. About half of the words are really misspelled, and I couldn't read it. And she also got 100% on every spelling test to that point. And so I thought, what is going on with my child? And I had tears running down my face, and the teacher came out and said, "What's going on, Nora?" And I'd been volunteering in the classroom, so she knew me. And I said, "What's wrong with Colleen? I'm told she's like the best reader and the best speller in her class, but look at this writing. And she said, well, you don't want to squelch her creativity. It'll come and she'll start to spell correctly. So don't worry about it. That really did not feel right. And then soon after, they did the Iowa test in second grade. And Colleen was put in gifted and talented because she was in the 90th percentile on her math scores. However, her reading score was a year below grade level. So those two things, this writing piece and that score, made me realize that something was awry. And I started researching reading kind of like a crazy person, to be honest. I hadn't gone back into nursing yet. I was still staying home with Kelly, and had gone to a game, a University of Michigan football game, and before the game went into a bookstore and saw this book called Why Johnny Can't Read. And it was the first book that I read on my quest of researching reading. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And then I kept reading more books, and I'd go to schools and I'd observe programs and did all kinds of things, because Colleen could memorize her spelling words so beautifully, even multi-syllable words, and she'd get them all right on the test, and she couldn't spell them by the time she got home on Friday, and she certainly couldn't spell them in her writing. And she would not, if I would try to give her an unfamiliar book to work through with reading, she would throw it across the room. And she was a really placid, sweet-natured child too. So all of that trauma, if you have a child that struggles at all, and most of us, if we have more than one child or even one child, do have one that's definitely subliterate, if not, a significant struggler, you understand how it impacts the whole family. So our whole family revolved around Colleen's spelling test and her spelling words and her reading stuff. And she was just so shy and reserved and insecure, at such a young age. So I put my all and my everything, really, into figuring out how to teach her how to read. And when I found this former professor from Michigan State who had a reading center where she was teaching kids in 12 hours how to read, I thought, that's pretty crazy. But she told me that, when I asked her, are you teaching phonics? Are you teaching whole language? Because those are the two things I'd been researching. And she said, no and no. The research really shows what you need to do to teach anybody to read to their highest potential, but we don't teach it to teachers in colleges of ed, and which I thought was a very odd thing to say. So anyway, she told me about a book to read. I read the book, and I taught Colleen to read in 3 hours. And I even couldn't believe it. She came home from school one day, and she had a Bailey Schoolhouse book. And if I saw the book, I would know from the cover. And she asked me if she could read it. And I'm like, that'd be like if she, almost as crazy if she said, Mom, can I climb up on the roof of the house and jump off or go play in traffic or something? I'm like, what? Because she never, ever would read anything new and unfamiliar. And she sat on the couch, and she read the book cover to cover without getting up. And I'm calling her dad, and I'm calling my mom, and I'm calling my sisters, and I'm like, she's reading this book. And they're like, is she really reading the book? And I'm like, I don't know, but it looks like she's reading the book. So she finished the book, and she told me all about it. And from then, she was off as far as her reading. I mean, she just started flying, reading everything. She loved to read. Her spelling stayed improved. It definitely improved, but it did not become really good until for probably 2 years. She had been practicing spelling wrong for so long that she still couldn't spell was correctly in quite a few words. So in spelling, I found since then, takes a good bit longer to catch up than reading instruction, and getting that reading down does. So that really helped me understand that a child who's been read to every day of her life, a child who has had so many life experiences, has so much background knowledge, has had so much in her world, still can be a struggling reader. However, she obviously could learn how to read if I could teach her in just a few hours. So that was the spark that truly led me to continuing to look into this, plus talking to people about it, because it was kind of crazy that in 3 hours she learned to read. But then when I talked to friends, they had kids who struggled with reading too. So I started teaching them, and it all kind of snowballed and took on a life of its own, all because of this, situation with Colleen. So as a parent, I completely can relate to and empathize with and sympathize with that pain that happens as your parent when your child is suffering. So it's so crucial that we don't look at our kids as limited because of the situation, especially with reading, of where they're at. they don't have to be limited. You know, anything is possible. If somebody can speak and talk, they can learn to read. And that's what I have found, regardless of age, regardless of ability level, regardless of any of it. And like the professor from Michigan State told me, about 12 hours, if you're working one-on-one, especially with a child 2nd grade and older, will move those kids to where they can become very proficient readers. Some, okay, all kids are different. Some are less time, like Colleen with 3 hours. Some are more, that may take dozens of hours. But it doesn't take forever if you're really doing tremendously effective and efficient reading instruction that's based on what the research says you need to do to teach anybody to read to their highest potential. So I thank Colleen really every day for this, helping me find really what is my life's mission and putting me on that path. And I think none of it, from her experience to opening my reading center to creating, a system and training teachers, none of it was an accident. It all was, meant to be and for a reason. And now Colleen is 30 years old and expecting her first baby, and loves to read and has been an exceptional reader, writer, and speller for most of her life now, which is very exciting. So that is her story, and that is why I'm here doing the work that I do. And I greatly appreciate you watching, and I thank you for joining in and being part of our mission to teach the world to read.